Giannis Antetokounmpo is already talking about eventually leaving Miami, and players are reacting. From Bam Adebayo choosing his words carefully to Bobby Portis and Norman Powell already going at each other over the Giannis trade. Things are getting messy, and apparently there's even more tension behind the scenes. Let's get into it. Let's start with what the Heat actually gave up, because that's the backdrop for everything that's happening right now. The Milwaukee Bucks agreed to trade the two-time MVP, along with Bobby Portis, to the Miami Heat for Tyler Herro, Kel'el Ware, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Kasparas Jakusionis, 3 first-round picks, 1 pick swap, and 1 second-rounder. That's 4 rotation players and a mountain of draft capital gone for 1 guy. So when that guy turns around 2 months later and starts talking about his eventual return to the team he just left, people in that Miami locker room notice. Start with Jaime Jaquez Jr. He didn't even get a phone call. He found out the way everybody else did. Jaquez was playing a pickup game when the news broke, and his reaction to getting sent to Milwaukee was caught on camera. Jaquez had played his entire NBA career in Miami, and as a California native used to the sunny southern states, being hauled off to Wisconsin represented a significant change for him. That's a guy whose entire NBA life got rerouted so Giannis could put on a Heat jersey. And now the same guy who caused that reroute is on a podcast talking about how he'll eventually want to leave too. Then there's Norman Powell. Powell wasn't traded away in the deal, but he was pushed out the door anyway, and he's been the most candid player in this whole saga. Powell believed he would re-sign with the Miami Heat and potentially play alongside Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he opened up about his departure from Miami, revealing that he thought the Heat's pursuit of Antetokounmpo could eventually result in the two teaming up. He put it simply on a recent appearance, saying he genuinely believed he was staying in Miami for the whole year, and that people close to the situation kept telling him a Norman-Giannis pairing sounds really good. Instead, the money didn't work, and Powell was gone before he ever got the chance to share a court with the guy Miami blew up its roster for. Powell didn't stop there. He went further, laying out exactly why the front office couldn't keep him around, and in doing so, he dragged another new Heat player into it. Powell said Andrew Wiggins would have had to opt out and take less than his $30 million player option, and the team would have had to move Nikola Jovic to make it work. And then came the part that actually caused static inside the building. Powell suggested that Miami's front office basically told him, if you want Giannis, you have to take Bobby Portis, and that it played a part in the tough financial squeeze the team found itself in. Portis was not amused. He didn't want to be painted as the guy Miami had to swallow just to land the superstar everybody wanted. Portis's reaction was seemingly born from the notion that Powell was framing him as a throw-in or salary dump in the trade rather than an important part of it, and he fired back publicly, telling Powell to keep his name out his mouth. Powell tried to walk it back, insisting no disrespect was meant, but the damage was done. 1 Heat locker room, 1 trade for Giannis, and already 2 guys sniping at each other over how it all went down. As one fan on social media summed up the mess, watching 2 players who are supposed to be building something together turn on each other before the season even started felt like a preview of how fragile this whole thing might actually be. Now bring in Bam Adebayo, because his reaction is the one that matters most. He's the guy who's actually still there, still expected to build a partnership with Giannis on the floor. When the trade first went through, Bam didn't wait to have his say. Adebayo gave Giannis a warm welcome via social media, joking, "Y'all gave my boy a snack basket." In the comments of the team's post, a nod to the fact that Giannis is famous around the league for how much he loves trying new snacks. It was lighthearted, it was warm, and it set the tone that Bam wanted this partnership to work. But when Bam actually sat down to talk about it seriously, weeks later, his answer was more guarded than excited. Nearly a month after the trade, Bam Adebayo, the team's heart and soul, gave his first real reaction to the move, and it was as buttoned up as you'd expect. He didn't elaborate much about Giannis specifically, but he kept it all about winning, saying, "Biggest thing is we want to win. You can always be aligned with somebody who is about the right stuff and wanting to win. That's not a guy throwing a parade. That's a guy choosing his words like he already understands this situation is bigger than a highlight reel." So that's the picture before Giannis ever opened his mouth on a podcast about wanting to go back to Milwaukee someday. 1 teammate shipped out and caught on camera mid-shock. 1 guard pushed out the door blaming the deal for his exit. 1 big man firing back at that guard in public. And the franchise centerpiece giving a measured, almost cautious welcome. As 1 Heat fan on Reddit put it while the Powell-Portis back and forth was unfolding, "It's wild that Miami hasn't even played a full season with Giannis yet, and the locker room drama is already stacking up like this. That's the environment Giannis dropped his comments into. And to understand why he's already talking about leaving a team he just joined, you have to go back to why he wanted out of Milwaukee in the first place. Giannis didn't get to Miami by accident, and he definitely didn't get there quietly. This was over a decade in the making, and it ended with him walking away from the only NBA franchise he'd ever known. The Bucks selected him with the number 15 pick in the 2013 NBA draft, and he spent his first 13 seasons with the organization before being traded to Miami. During that run, he went from an unknown raw prospect to a two-time MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and NBA champion. That's not a resume you walk away from lightly. That's a guy who built a city's identity around him for over a decade. So what actually pushed him out? Winning, or more specifically, the lack of it in recent years. Antetokounmpo admitted that he had a stronger desire to compete for championships every year, versus the comfort of staying loyal to the NBA franchise that gave him everything. A lot of that had to do with bad luck and injuries, which prevented the Bucks from making deep postseason runs, and it weighed heavily on Giannis, who didn't want to regret being stagnant while he was still in his prime. He said as much directly in his own words, describing the moment he realized he had to make a change. "I really believed that I would stay in Milwaukee for my entire career. But then I saw I was in my comfort zone. I wanted something different, and I'm happy to be in Miami." That's about as honest as a superstar gets about why he left. Not bitterness, not a blow-up, just a guy staring down the back half of his career and deciding comfort wasn't enough anymore. There was fear in that decision too, and Giannis admitted it out loud. Sitting down for an interview after the trade, he talked about the risk he took by pushing to leave the only franchise he'd ever known. He said, "I'm scared that maybe if I don't make that decision, that when I'm going to be 37, I'm going to say, 'Why didn't you take that risk?' It's a risk." And he made it clear that part of him was still scared of the change, worried the grass might not actually be greener anywhere else. The Bucks, for their part, didn't fight it. According to their own front office, Miami simply put together the best offer, and it lined up with what Giannis wanted. Bucks general manager Jon Horst shed light on the organization's decision, saying Miami presented the strongest overall trade package available. And just as importantly, Antetokounmpo made it clear that Miami was where he wanted to continue his career. The Bucks took into consideration what Giannis wanted, choosing to reward arguably the greatest player in their franchise's history, rather than dig in and fight the request. There was speculation for months about where he'd actually land. The Greek Freak had dropped clues about enjoying bigger cities and Florida's climate, and even Shaquille O'Neal weighed in publicly, advising Antetokounmpo not to worry about market size. In his potential search for a new home, citing social media as a catch-all that shrinks the globe, Miami had been circling for a while, watching from a distance, hoping he'd eventually put in the request. Despite Antetokounmpo expressing his desire to remain in Milwaukee at one point, a handful of teams kept an eye on the situation, with the Heat among the organizations doing so. By the time it actually happened, the emotional weight of it hit Giannis hard. He didn't leave Milwaukee like a guy who was happy to be rid of the place. He left like someone tearing away from home. He posted a farewell video to the city, thanking the fans directly, saying he hoped bringing a trophy to that city meant something to them, because it meant so much to him and that he wanted the fans to hear it from his own mouth. "The city of Milwaukee will always be in his heart." That line, "will always be in my heart," is worth remembering, because it's almost word for word what he'd repeat months later on the podcast that set off this entire reaction cycle. Even in the moment he was leaving, he was already talking like a guy who saw this as temporary. He wasn't closing a door, he was leaving it cracked open, and everyone who was paying attention could tell. That's the guy who walked into the Miami locker room this summer. Someone who chased championships out of Wisconsin, but never actually let go of it emotionally. And that tension between chasing rings in Florida and missing home in the Midwest is exactly what came spilling out on a podcast that Heat players are now being asked to respond to. This is the moment that actually kicked off this entire news cycle. So it's worth slowing down and looking at exactly what Giannis said, because the wording matters. Sitting down for an interview, Giannis was asked about his future, and instead of giving the standard "I'm focused on the season" answer, he went somewhere far more direct. "It will always be in my heart. And luckily, when I finish this cycle with Miami, which I don't know when it will end. And if I will definitely return to Milwaukee. And I don't know if they want me then," Antetokounmpo said during an appearance on Anisti, the podcast. Read that again, slowly, because there's a lot packed into one sentence. He's not saying he wants out right now. He's saying that whenever his time in Miami wraps up, a cycle he admits he can't even predict the length of, Milwaukee is where he sees himself going back to. Not another big market, not a third contender, home. It does sound like Giannis wants to retire in Milwaukee, but there's a caveat. He did say "and if," so his story with Miami is still unwritten, and he is the centerpiece of the team now, with championship aspirations. And there's no telling how long his run with the Heat could actually last. That's the tightrope he's walking. He's simultaneously the guy Miami built its whole future around, and the guy publicly floating an eventual exit before he's even played a full season for them. This isn't a brand new theme for him either. Just a month before this podcast dropped, he'd said something in a similar vein, and it planted the same seed. "I really believe that I would stay in Milwaukee for my entire career," Giannis said in that earlier comment, one that already had Bucks fans buzzing about a future reunion. So this isn't a one-off slip. This is a pattern. Every few weeks, in a different setting, Giannis keeps bringing Milwaukee back up, unprompted, like it's still living rent-free in his head. And fans on both sides caught it immediately. As one Bucks fan reacted online after the podcast clip circulated, hearing him talk about when, not if, made it feel like Giannis had already mentally scheduled his own homecoming. A reaction echoed across social media as the clip spread. Meanwhile, Heat fans reading the same quote were split, some brushing it off as a guy being sentimental about the franchise that raised him. Others quietly worried that their new franchise player was already talking about his exit strategy before the ink on his introductory press conference had even dried. There's context that makes all of this sting a little more for Miami. Just weeks earlier, the Heat had watched a totally different superstar decision play out, and it didn't go their way. LeBron James ended up heading to Philadelphia instead of Miami, which was a dream Heat fans had quietly held on to. Even at 41, LeBron would have made that team more formidable. And now that the 76ers scooped him up, Miami's next moves became far less exciting. So Miami didn't just miss out on LeBron. They landed Giannis instead. And now the same superstar they got is the one publicly acknowledging he sees himself elsewhere down the road. Sure, they could still grab names like DeMar DeRozan, Russell Westbrook, or Bradley Beal. But at this point in their careers, it's legitimately worth questioning whether this roster can actually make a title run. It's worth remembering, too, that Giannis wasn't fully settled on Miami as his forever destination even during the trade talks themselves. Some had suggested Antetokounmpo should look elsewhere if he wanted to win immediately, because Miami's front office likely knew they weren't walking away with the offseason's biggest prize in terms of instant title odds. He came to Miami for the opportunity, not necessarily because it was the flashiest or most obvious title path. And that distinction matters when you're trying to figure out why he's already talking about an eventual return north. So now you've got a superstar who left one franchise because he was scared of staying comfortable, who joined a new one hoping to chase more rings, and who's already on record saying that once this cycle ends, his heart takes him back to where it all started. That's not a guy trying to burn a bridge, but it is a guy who just handed his new locker room a lot to process. And the way that locker room actually processed it says just as much about where this Heat team stands as anything Giannis himself has said. Here's where things get complicated for Miami, because this podcast moment didn't land in a vacuum. It landed on top of a roster that was already dealing with fractures from the very deal that brought Giannis in. Start with the money, because the money is the root of almost everything that's gone sideways. The Miami Heat faced financial restrictions in trying to retain free agent Norman Powell after executing the trade, because although they owned Powell's bird rights and could go over the salary cap to retain him, they became hard-capped at the first apron when trading for Giannis, leaving limited flexibility to rebuild the bench after sending 4 players to Milwaukee. That hard cap didn't just cost them Powell, it reshaped the entire calculus of who stays and who goes. If Andrew Wiggins picked up his player option and Miami couldn't shed any other salary, the Heat's offer to Powell would have had to start at roughly $12 million to $13 million per year, well below what a first-time All-Star would command on the open market, which made Wiggins the swing vote of Miami's entire offseason. One guy's decision about his own contract ended up determining whether the team could keep another one of its best players. That's the kind of pressure that turns a locker room tense fast, and it's exactly the pressure that boiled over into the Powell-Portis spat. Look at how quickly that argument escalated. Powell wasn't trying to start beef. He was just explaining out loud on a podcast why he thought he was staying in Miami and didn't. But the second he brought Portis's name into it, framing him as part of a package deal Miami had to accept. Portis treated it like a direct insult. While Giannis was unquestionably the centerpiece of the trade, Portis figured to be a key part of Miami's success this coming season in his own right, and he wasn't going to sit quietly while a departing player made it sound otherwise. Powell tried to smooth it over, but the exchange was already out there, screenshotted and spreading. That kind of friction matters because it shows what happens when a franchise reshapes an entire roster around one guy, and that one guy is already talking, on the record, about an eventual departure of his own. It's not hard to see why fans reacted the way they did. One user online, reacting to the Powell-Portis fallout right as the Giannis podcast comments were spreading, said the Heat's offseason was starting to feel less like a championship build and more like a group of guys who never actually wanted to be in the same room together. A sentiment that picked up traction as both stories collided in the same week. Then there's Bam. Of everyone in that locker room, Bam Adebayo is the one under the most pressure to make this partnership work, because he's the incumbent, the guy who's been the face of the franchise since Jimmy Butler left. And publicly at least, Bam has tried to project genuine excitement about pairing up with Giannis. He's publicly expressed his excitement in getting an opportunity to put it all together on the floor, saying, everybody's seen the battles we had. We got the same agent and talked about what if it would happen. And now we're to this point, so I'm excited for the season. I'm excited to be his teammate. I'm excited for the city of Miami and the energy we gained. There's an actual connection there too, beyond basketball. Bam Adebayo and Giannis share the same agent, Alex Saratsas, a native of Greece who has represented Antetokounmpo since coming into the NBA, and Adebayo considers him a brother. That relationship predates the trade entirely, and it's part of why some in the organization believed Bam could help recruit, and more importantly, help retain Giannis long-term. The same way a Miami legend once helped bring two other superstars to South Beach, people have compared it to the pack that turned the Heat into an elite franchise when LeBron James and Chris Bosh opted to join forces with Dwyane Wade. But even with that personal bond, Bam's public comments about the actual trade have stayed noticeably restrained, not effusive. When he finally addressed the move on record, weeks after it happened, he steered every answer back to results. Not friendship, not excitement, not legacy, just winning. That's a very deliberate choice of words from a guy who knows exactly how much scrutiny every sentence about Giannis is going to get right now, especially with the podcast comments still fresh. Even Giannis's early workouts with Bam were framed publicly in a way that reads differently in hindsight. He said the two of them worked out for 2 to 3 hours, and that he knew Bam was a good player, but after the workout realized he's not a good player, he's a great player. That's Giannis building the partnership up in public. But it's also a guy who's clearly still measuring, still evaluating, still treating this as a new relationship he's testing out rather than one he's fully locked into. Given what he'd go on to say about cycles and eventual returns to Milwaukee, that early caution reads a lot more pointed now than it did back when the quote first came out. So the picture inside that Miami locker room right now isn't one of total unity. It's Jaquez, gone, blindsided on a pickup court. It's Powell, gone, blaming the numbers and dragging Portis into it. It's Portis, firing back, defending his own value. It's Bam, cautiously optimistic, choosing his words like a man who knows the ground under this partnership might not be as solid as the front office wants everyone to believe. And now, on top of all of it, the guy this entire rebuild was built around is telling podcasts that Milwaukee is still where his heart lives. So where does this actually leave Miami? Not with a resolution, with a wait and see, and a locker room that's already shown it can crack under pressure before the real pressure has even started. Giannis is still, by every measure, the centerpiece of this franchise now. Giannis Antetokounmpo wants more championships, and so do the Miami Heat. Their interests are officially aligned, and the Heat finally have another superstar. That alignment is real. Nobody's disputing that Giannis showed up to Miami wanting to win, and wanting to win now, in his prime, not years down the line. The podcast comments about eventually returning to Milwaukee don't cancel that out. They coexist with it, uncomfortably, the same way his fear of staying stagnant in Milwaukee coexisted with 13 years of loyalty to that franchise. What's still unresolved is the roster around him. The more interesting path for Miami involves Wiggins declining his option and re-signing at a lower starting salary spread across an extra guaranteed year. a move that would carve out meaningful cap space beneath the apron. That decision alone could determine whether Norman Powell ever actually returns to finish what he thought he'd started, or whether that partnership with Giannis he once envisioned stays exactly what it's been so far, a missed opportunity. In the Portis situation, however it gets smoothed over in practice, is now a matter of public record. These are teammates who are going to share a locker room for an entire season, after trading shots about each other's value in a trade. There's also the matter of what the front office does next, because Pat Riley isn't exactly known for standing pat. Even before Giannis officially arrived, the expectation inside the building was that more moves were coming. Heat president Pat Riley had stated he didn't plan to run it back, and that he should be on to plan B as he looks to restore Miami into a place where top players want to win a title. Because currently, it's not that. That quote predates the trade, but it hangs over everything that's happened since. Landing Giannis was supposed to be the answer to that problem. Instead, it's created a new set of problems layered right on top. And then there's the piece nobody in that organization can control, what Giannis himself decides to do with his own comfort level year after year. He's already proven, with the Milwaukee decision, that 13 years of loyalty and a championship ring weren't enough to keep him somewhere once he started feeling stagnant. There's no reason to assume Miami gets a longer leash than that automatically, just because they gave up 4 players and a stack of picks to get him. If the results don't come, if the Heat can't build the contender he actually wants around him, the same instinct that pushed him out of Milwaukee is sitting right there waiting. What makes this particular moment different from a typical player misses his old team story is the timing and the specificity. Giannis didn't just say Milwaukee will always mean something to him. He recently discussed his future and made an interesting comment about potentially returning to the Bucks once his time in Miami is over, using language that framed his Heat tenure as a phase with a beginning and an end, not a destination. That's the sentence his new teammates have had to sit with, react to, and try to build trust around, all while dealing with their own fallout from the very trade that brought him there in the first place. For now, nothing is settled. Jaquez is adjusting to life in Milwaukee. Powell is explaining his exit from a different city, still occasionally getting dragged back into headlines with Portis. Portis is trying to prove he's more than a name attached to a trade he didn't ask to be part of. Bam is measuring every word about the partnership everyone expects him to carry. And Giannis is out here 2 months into a new chapter, already talking publicly about the one he left behind, leaving the door open, deliberately, to a story that isn't close to finished.